I was coming close to the end of several presentations on the use of lifespan developmental perspectives for understanding human dilemmas and for shaping what I think is reasonable to expect would go on in the consulting room for those of us who want to address the issues that clients bring to us. I will probably finish today or next time. I'm nearing the end of that long haul, and I'll have some things to say about it in retrospect when I'm done. But let me work my way through whatever more is remaining. I may get through today, I may not. I want to start by paying homage to somebody I forgot last time. I did tell for me, a very moving story about the elderly Hungarian woman who consulted me as she was moving toward death with serious diabetes, knowing she wasn't going to live very much longer and feeling as if her whole life had been nothing but an endless series of tortures and failures. And the work I did with her. I did mention her husband in passing, uh, but I don't think I paid him enough homage. And I did have a few sessions where I did couples therapy with them, and he himself, he had a kind of wounded nobility about him. He had wanted to rescue her. He had defied his family to embrace her and to marry her, even though she was not good enough for his family. He faced being disinherited because his wealthy aristocratic family wouldn't put up with the fact that he was going to marry such a common and useless person. And I found the story of his young life, struggling to become a physician and taking those kinds of chances and risks quite admirable. And then he had a horrible fate. He went blind at a very early age. And I don't think I told that story in its fullness. What had happened to him? Uh, he had completed his medical training and he was in the early stages of setting up his practice. He was a general practitioner, and much to his horror and everyone's horror, he had a case of early onset macular degeneration disease, and there was no treatment for it of any kind back then. And within 2 years of trying to go into practice, he was functionally blind. He had some peripheral vision around the periphery of his eyesight, but he didn't have enough eyesight to practice medicine anymore. He had to give up. And suddenly, my client, even though she had young children, had to find out how to work. He had some insurance that supported him for a while. He did manage to get employed. He wasn't going to just stay home and be a burden. He worked for many years in the shipping department of a factory in East Los Angeles. He was able to pack boxes with feel mainly and had enough peripheral vision that he could see how to close them. And he worked really hard like a blue collar animal of work in a mine where he had been trained to be a physician. That must have been really hard on him morally, although it did do something for his self-esteem to feel like he was doing whatever he could to contribute monetarily to the upkeep of the family. And his wife always honored him for the nobility of his struggle, and she tried to be as cheerful and optimistic as possible. But he was brooding all the time. He was unhappy, and he had every reason for being so. So I wanted to fill in what had happened to him and the other terrible piece of fate that had fallen on this family. What an awful thing. All right, that's enough about that. Uh, Where did I want to go? I think I wanted to go to screen sharing. Here we go. Yep, it's here. Oops. by making a mess of what I'm trying to do. Okay, now I have it. I have the document I want. I'll close this so I can see. There. I hope you can see what's on the screen. I assume you can. I now have epigenetic theory and the interventions that flow from Ericksonian theory. We're at stage 5 prime, getting ready to die. And the signs of trouble in this era are in the left-hand column at the bottom of the page. Profound despair, sense that life as lived has been a failure. That's clearly what the poor woman brought to me. So, what is it that we need to do to help people navigate the rapids of change before they die? What I did with her was to help her rediscover the importance of and the triumphs of the self. Her life was not just bleak. Her life was not without significance. Her life was not without important achievements. And she deserved to be celebrated rather than chastised and feel useless in the way that she did. So, what can we do for clients? And I always treated her as I indicated in the right hand column, creating a sense of the client as a cultural treasure in the session. I remember doing things with her like saying to her, she was a little bit ahead of me on the trail. And I felt privileged to have her in my office because I would hear what the perspectives were for higher on the mountain and further on the trail, both good perspectives and bad perspectives. What was the weariness of the journey about? What should I be aware of? She would be my teacher as much as I would be her helper. And you heard me doing, oh, cultural treasure. I borrowed that from the Japanese. That's how Japanese view elderly people. They even get a certificate from the government, I think, that they are indeed a cultural treasure. I carried on a life review for her and with her. I said in my last presentation, it was very much like panning for gold in a stream. I was looking for nuggets of gold that I could hold up to her to show her that her life had value and meaning. And this is another thing I did not do with her, but I've done with other clients. Staging an anticipatory funeral with significant others, inviting other people to come to a session and asking the client, what do they think was important about their life? What do they want in their eulogy? How do they want to be remembered? And starting a conversation about all that. And if it's blank and deficient, then trying to find some assignments to do to things that would make their eulogy more meaningful before they finally die. All right, I will leave that be and I will stop screen sharing for the moment. And I will have a sip of some more pomegranate juice. I now need to go to good enough parenting because what is it that elderly parents are to do for the children that will be left behind as they get ready to live the last chapters of the book of their life? Let's see. Here it is. Yes, I see it, I think. Yes, here we are. Stage 5 prime, the beginning of decline to the act of dying. Here is my prescription for parents. At some point, every parent must confront the beginning of the loss of one or more functions, of the onset of increasing frailty, and of having to deal with the unavoidable fact that death awaits in the near future. Once more, a delicate balancing act emerges for parents and their offspring. as the end of life moves ever closer. There is a fine line to be trodden. If we live long enough, many of us will wind up as the symbolic children of our own children. Our offspring will have to take over our management and our decision making as we spiral into increasing helplessness. There are those parents who want to crumble, surrender, and enter helplessness long before they actually need to become helpless. This can create resentment and feelings of oppression in their offspring. On the other hand, an even greater number of parents cussedly resist surrendering bits of their autonomy, refusing to surrender driver's licenses, unwillingness to accept help and not live alone any longer when cognitive or physical limitations make full independent living no longer possible, or resistance to turning over management of finances to the oncoming generation, to mention some examples. Caring parents know enough to involve their children in making contingency plans for this stressful time of transition, plans that involve full and frank discussion between the parties. They strive to confront the inevitable with as much grace and courage as they can muster, and they extract meaning out of their ability to serve as useful and admirable role models, even as they demonstrate how to embrace decline and death with integrity. All right. That's what good enough parenting is at that era. Stop screen sharing. And I will go back to one more screen share. I have to get rid of this. I have to get rid of this. And this. And I have succeeded. Here is the family life cycle. We are now ready for stage 6 in the family life cycle. Carter McGoldrick called this stage of the family life cycle families in later life. What is the challenge for the family? The challenge are variations on the theme of what I read about when I presented Good Enough Parenting. The members of the family have to accept the shifting of generational roles. Here is what the older generation has to go through. A, maintaining their own intimacy, functions, and interests in the face of physiological decline. As long as they're alive, and continuing to explore new familial and social role options. How can I remain vital even if things I've been used to doing are drifting away and I can't do them anymore? What are the newer things I can learn how to do? Or how can I shift and do more of what I already know how to do so I'm still involved, still have some meaning in my life, and still participating in some ways. B, supporting a more central role for the middle generation. Well, who is the middle generation? The children of the elderly people, and they probably have grandchildren. I think that's why Carter McGoldrick called them the middle generation. They have to take a more central role. They have to do more, begin to do more of the decision making. They have to begin to do practical things for their parents as if their parents were almost their children. Making room in the middle generation. The middle generation has to make room in the system for the wisdom and experience of the elderly, supporting the older generation without over functioning for them. And finally, again, back for the older generation, the members of the older generation may have to deal with the loss of a spouse, the loss of their siblings, the loss of other peers, and preparation for their own death. What's helpful to them is to begin a life review and integration, trying to see what the overall arc of their life has been, what meaning there has been in significant moments, and what else they still might do before they have to say their final goodbye. So I will pause for a moment and I'll stop the screen sharing. All right, now I will just lecture. I have indeed completed whatever I wanted to say about the use of family life cycle theory, both individual life cycle theory and family life cycle theory. It is full of riches, but there are many things about it that I think that are very important for we psychologists to pay attention to, and for whatever lay public ever tunes in on me needs to pay attention to. The helping professions, as I've said on earlier occasions, have been badly deformed by economic forces and by cultural beliefs. We have, as humans who are to help in my profession, become increasingly mechanized, increasingly biologized, and increasingly focused on helping people to feel better quickly, whether by medication or by some little rituals we can have them do that will reduce their experience to stress. We no longer want to serve or able to serve the function of the facilitator of significant life change. Insurance companies have no interest in that. Other kinds of third party payers have no interest in that. Clients themselves have been sold a bill of goods that they're supposed to have some quick fix, that they can come into somebody's office and be given a magic pill or be given a book of cognitive behavioral exercises to do, and then somehow their intolerable lives will be made tolerable by this putting a band aid on cancers. I don't believe in doing that. What I like about family life cycle theory is it's outside of that model entirely. It simply is a call to all of us that there are natural, predictable, and manageable human dilemmas that spring up and then mute over the life cycle. And many of us get trapped and stuck in one of them. We don't have the resources, the knowledge, or the courage to do what's necessary to negotiate our way through that set of rapids in the river and to go further into the river where the river begins to meander again. And I'm trying to teach my listeners that there's wisdom available and tactics to use in the consulting room that helps that. It also destigmatizes what clients come in about. They come in seeking an education about something. In the end, I think we are educators of a kind. We educate about life, about its dilemmas, about the ways people can get stuck in life and what causes the stuckness, and about ways people can liberate themselves if they can find the courage to change. They can liberate themselves from the stuckness that they're complaining about. And the journey can go on. And the journey can go on for a long time. And there'll be even new challenges that come that are unheard of at the time of the challenge that makes people present themselves. It is a liberating, it is a life sustaining, it is an encouraging, it is a non stigmatized way to think about what the problems of and what care is given. We ask people to accept that they have a mental disorder. That's a terrible thing to do. That is a stigmatizing label to put on somebody. It's a nice way of saying you're a little bit crazy or you're very crazy with some of the labels we give. You are deviant, you are crazy, there's something broken in you, there's something wrong. It's inside you, it's probably located in the way your neurons function, and we have to fix the crazy in you. The whole structure I've been trying to present in many lectures goes far away from that. Nobody's crazy. As a matter of fact, we have to let our clients lead, try to understand the whirlpools they're drowning in, try to go with them into those whirlpools, try to encourage them, try to be their companions. It's the status differential is very little. The only thing we have to offer maybe that puts us in a better status is not some scientific training we've had, but the life experiences we've had. Maybe we've had enough education from other clients and from our own life and from things we read that we understand and can see things they can't notice or pay attention to. That we're not better human beings, we're not less damaged. We're not superior. We're only maybe, hopefully, superior in some kinds of wisdom. And that's the hopeful message we can give. We don't have to drown in the stupidity of the mental illness model of what it is we're attempting to do in our offices. And we don't have to buy the model that the client is a self contained unit. What's going wrong is within the client, and the something in the neuronal functioning of the client has to be fixed, and then they will be better. No, what's going wrong may be in the system in which they're embedded. It may be wrong in the family. It may be a individual developmental challenge. It may be, as it is now, that the culture is in trouble. We're in a pandemic right now, and it's very stressful. And I don't know if we pay sufficient attention to what the effects on all of us are of being shut down in the way we are and not being able to carry out our lives. Sometimes the problem is in the economy. Inflation rates are running away. Jobs are hard to come by. There are major stressors in the economy that need to be paid attention to if we're to be of any help. So I think I came to a quiet place suddenly. So So people are embedded in systems of increasing complexity, including ecological systems. And every one of those systems radiates downward to the things that are in the system and have an effect on the system. The system of what influences us is not all internally generated from within us. It radiates down into us from the systems in which we're embedded just as much as is generated inside ourselves. And that perspective is missing in most of the treatment we give, or are being called upon now to give to the people who consult with us. So I'm going to move on now because I have moved even beyond all the teaching I have been doing for these many weeks about the importance of developmental perspectives. They're now only a part of who I am in the consulting room. Uh, the next stage, my later life stage of my evolution as a psychologist therapist, is I have come to rely increasingly not on any conceptual structure of the kind I presented, nothing I was taught in graduate school, nothing that I put together that I presented to all of you. All of it is somehow woven into the fabric of my being now. And I simply show up, and I think the thing that directs and focuses my attention and sends me forward into my interactions with clients, I want to label simply as intuition. I show up for each session without a plan. I don't believe in making a treatment plan. That seems like the most ridiculous thing imaginable to me. You make a treatment plan, the client comes in. There's been some trauma during the week to the client. The spouse has been given a cancer diagnosis, and you thought you were going to talk this week based on what happened last week about something in the workplace, or you were going to teach relaxation exercise. I don't know what the fuck you thought you were going to do, but life is unpredictable. You have to be open to the ineffable, the unpredictable, the chaotic, uh, and ride the wave with the client. So I don't make any plans from session to session about what I'm going to do in the next session. That seems foolish to me. So one of the hallmarks of my work currently is to lean on intuition, and I'll make a more formal presentation of what that means next time. But I think the second thing is to have the courage to search for something novel. We know that we fail frequently. We see clients, and we should expect, all of us who do this work, that about 15% of the people who come in to see us are either going to leave quickly or just flounder and stick around, and we have a sense that nothing is happening. We may even be bored talking to them. Something has gone amiss. We're not having any useful effect that's identifiable, and that's a limit of what we're able to do. And okay, I think we have to make peace for that. One of my heroes, Helmut Kaiser, wrote a paper. Yeah, I think I'll go there. I don't think I've talked about this before. The title of the paper is called "On the Problem of Therapeutic Responsibility." And in that paper, he said two people come together, an understanding that psychotherapy is going to unfold takes place. And now the therapist begins to do whatever the therapist thinks the therapist is supposed to be doing. And the client comes and the client does whatever the client thinks the client is supposed to be doing. And they interact. And he uses that statistic too. A lot of it goes nowhere. And he said, we have a tendency in our profession to do what he thinks is awful. The tendency is to do client blaming, to hold the client responsible. It is the client's failure. The client was not motivated enough. The client had too profound psychopathology. The client had a borderline personality disorder. Nobody can be expected to be useful to anybody with a borderline personality disorder. The client wouldn't stop getting high on marijuana before he came to his session. So how can you be expected to be of any help if the client keeps using marijuana? On and on and on. There are a variety of excuses we have that calm us from having to feel guilty, ashamed, and that we failed. But the truth of the matter is, the client is only responsible for being the client. The client is not responsible for making the therapy happen. The therapist is 100% responsibility for making the therapy happen. If we can't figure out how to do that, if we failed, it's on us. It's okay. There's a difference between being responsible for something. We are responsible for every therapeutic failure, but it doesn't necessarily mean if we're responsible for something that that something is blameworthy. It may not be blameworthy that we failed. We're not that old a profession. We haven't been around for hundreds of years yet. Maybe there's much that we will learn or know about in dealing with people we don't do too well with. Maybe as individuals, we'll get better with some kinds of people we're not doing very well with if we keep trying. And as a profession, maybe generally we'll get better, increasingly better, with a large number of people we are confused about or don't have a very good track record in working with. We don't have to blame ourselves for that. We just have to take responsibility for it. Keep trying to learn. And for Christ's sake, what I'm going to talk about a lot, if you are doing the things you think you're supposed to be doing and not getting somewhere, try doing something you may never have thought of doing before. See what happens if you do that. Take that risk. Stick yourself out where you've never visited before. And that's going to be part of my theme. So I have talked to my colleagues recently about taking a bizarre risk with a client. And so I'll tell the same story my two listeners have heard from me recently. And that's their punishment for showing up today. They have to listen to me repeating myself. This was a client I saw. I stopped seeing her 15 years ago, and I was with her for about 3.5 years. So it was about 18 and a half years ago she came into my life. Uh, I was still operating with my sustaining philosophy. If somebody shows up, I will agree to work with them. I don't send people away because I'm afraid I'm going to fail, or because I don't think I have the expertise for working with them, or because I don't like them, or because I find what I'm being asked to listen to odious. Or I'm scared of them. A whole bunch of reasons I could use to send many people away, but I don't. I decide there's a message from the universe about something I should learn, so I will greet it and learn it. Maybe what I should learn is not to work with such a person, but whatever it is I need to learn, I'll be welcoming and see if I can learn. So this one started simply enough. I received a phone call from the client's mother. Would I see her daughter? I said, well, tell me about your daughter. Her daughter was then currently hospitalized in the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. And the hospital thought that she was capable of becoming violent and or of becoming suicidal. So the young woman was willing to sign a release and check herself out against medical advice. They wanted her to keep staying so that they could keep treating her. And she wanted to check herself out. They would not release her unless there was some licensed professional who would agree to take responsibility for her care. And the mother said, would you be willing to see her and sign a statement to UCLA that you're going to accept responsibility for her care? And everything in me was screaming, saying, well, you an asshole, what are you going to get involved in this? She might kill herself and she might hurt somebody else. What are you doing? And then I would say, no, mother's asking me to do this and I'm going to see what this is all about and I'm going to do it. So that's the side of me that prevailed. I wrote something and told the mother to come by and pick it up. We didn't have internet back then. Come by and pick up the thing I'm writing and take it to NPI and bring her to see me tomorrow. I have an opening at such and such a time. In she came. And I said, I gather you didn't like it at the Neuropsychiatric Institute. No, as soon as I arrived, they gave me 3 electroconvulsive shock treatments. I didn't enjoy that at all. It left me feeling confused, and I was tired all the time. It had a very bad effect, and they gave me very heavy medication. It didn't stop what I was going through at all. I pretended that I was better. I pretended I wasn't hearing voices anymore. I pretended I knew I had been sick and I now wasn't sick any longer and that I wanted to go. And they didn't believe me, and I tried to be as convincing as possible, but there was not. I went to group therapy. That didn't seem to be useful, and the psychiatrist only wanted to see me for 10 minutes to try and see how I was doing on my meds and to up the dosage. And the whole thing was awful, a waste of time. I felt like I was in some kind of horrible, uncaring prison and I wanted to get out. She seemed obviously very, very intelligent and very, very thoughtful. I said, well, how'd you get in the first place? She said, I was fleeing for my life. I said, you were fleeing for your life? She said, yes. I was frightened they were going to kill me. Well, who's they? And she said, I'm not sure who they was. I have theories. I, I think it was probably the mafia that was after me. Oh, the mafia was after you? How did you get on the wrong side of the mafia? I never tried to talk her out of her delusion from the beginning. I was going to listen to her delusion. I was going to enter her delusion. I was going to work from within her delusion. I was going to join her in her world. I wasn't going to try and tell her her world was sick and awful. She needed to stop being in that world. I think people do about as best as they can. And for whatever reasons, whatever we think are the symptoms we're engaged in, those symptoms are protecting us from something far worse. So I was not going to try and talk her out of what my profession calls her symptoms. So in I went, and she said, well, I was living in the Pacific Northwest then, and one night I knew that I was being spied upon. I just knew it for sure. I think that they had managed to tap my phone. I have an early version of a computer that I use in my work. I think somehow they managed to turn my computer on and listen to me over my computer in addition to my telephone. I think their microphones were buried in my apartment, and I was being spied on over and over again. Then some nights I would be coming home from the movies and there'd be a car behind me and I would turn to look and then the car would turn away. I'm sure I was being followed and that was no accident. That was not an accidental car. And I got into a terrible panic about 3 weeks ago, and I decided I had to get out of there as fast as possible. So I packed everything I could into some valises. I threw them in my car. And I said, where the hell am I going to go? And I did this at 2 o'clock in the morning, hoping that the people who were spying on me wouldn't notice that I was slipping out. And I got into my car at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I decided my father and my sister were up in the town I was living in. My parents were divorced. My mother is here in Los Angeles alone. I decided maybe my mother would take me in for a while, and I drive all the way down the coast and come to my mother's house. And I was going to come nonstop, and I did. I stayed up for 42 hours driving, and I just took a little rest here and there and put gas in the car and kept coming. And every time there was a car in back of me and following me, I'd pull over for a while and let the car pass. I think they may have been team following. Maybe they were still following me. I think I shook whoever might have been following me. I felt a little bit safer. But when I got to my mother's house, she was not home. I knocked on the door and knocked on the door. She had gone somewhere, and I said, "What the hell? Where am I going to go?" It was 5 o'clock in the morning the next day, or 2 days later, when I got to my mother's place, and I thought, well, my aunt and my uncle and my cousins live not too far away. I'll go there, and I woke them up. And I started to tell them how I was being followed. The mafia was going to kill me, and I had to be safe. And my aunt listened to me, and she immediately decided I was psychotic, and she called the psychiatric emergency. She called 911, the psychiatric emergency team, and she lives in Westwood. They took me and put me in the neuropsychiatric institute, and that's how I got into the neuropsychiatric institute. I said, "All right, you are a very thoughtful person. I'm glad you saved yourself and you're not dead. Nobody killed you. You're still alive. Now we have to figure out how to protect you and what to do with you. So you better tell me, why are you on the bad side of the mafia? You're pretty convinced the mafia is after you." And she said, "Yes, I violated something. I started doing something I shouldn't do. And I think I made the mafia very, very angry." "Well, what did you decide to do that you shouldn't do?" She said, "I was a sex worker." And I said, "You were a sex worker? What do you mean you were a sex worker?" She said, "Well, I discovered about 4 years before this incident where I left that I wanted to supplement my income. I was living in that small town. I had a job in a real estate office doing clerical work, but I wasn't living. I only had a very small, shitty apartment. I wasn't living very well. And what could I do that might supplement my income in my spare time when I wasn't at the real estate office? So I started exploring things. I looked at jobs in a small town. There aren't a lot of jobs, and part-time jobs on the weekend or in the evening. And it didn't look like anything that was going to make me any significant amount of money or anything I'd like to do. And then I like nosing around. I walk down the city streets. I like going into various stores and seeing what's there. And one day, there's a sex shop in the town. So I went into the sex shop and I looked at the lingerie and I looked at the pornographic magazines that were for sale. And there was a job posting there that they needed women who would give men comfort over the telephone. Didn't specifically say what I would be doing on the telephone, but they wanted to interview people who could comfort men over the telephone. So I decided I would call. And turned out this was a national corporation of some kind, and they needed somebody that would give them a local call here in town, and or at least in the geographical area. And they told me what I was going to do was I was going to do phone sex. I was going to help men to masturbate. They would talk to me and I would say encouraging things and I would tell them how much I love them, or I would try and find out what they wanted their fantasy partner to do and what I could pretend I was doing to myself or doing to them. And they would, I sounded like I had a nice voice on the phone, and they were willing to hire me on a probationary period. They would see what their customers were thinking, and if their customers wanted to book repeated visits with me, and if so, they would give me a permanent position. I could do this. And so I started about 4 years ago. And you know what? I wasn't turned off. It was fine. I actually felt like the guys were kind of pathetic. They were lonely. They were damaged in some way. I was doing some kind of kindness for them. And I was good at it. They wanted to come back often, 2 or 3 times a week. Many of them wanted to talk to me. And what was interesting for me is many of them didn't even want to engage me sexually anymore. They would book the time, and they said, you're such a kind person and a thoughtful person. I just want to tell you more about myself and tell you some of the dilemmas I'm having with my life. And in some ways, they were making me a psychotherapist. I was just giving them general comments on all kinds of things that had nothing to do with their sexuality. And on top of that, they were asking if they could meet me. They wanted to travel to town if they were out of towners and come take me out on a date. And I told them no. The rules of my employment forbid me from having any personal direct relationship with them face to face. The best I could do was talk to them on the phone. My employers didn't care what I talked to them on the phone about. If they wanted to tell me about problems with their wife, I could listen to that. It didn't have to be sex, but I am available for sexual encounters for you. But I can't see you personally. Then one guy showed up who was very interesting to her, and she kept talking to him a lot, and he was very persuasive. She had nothing but endless respect for him. He was a young, fully tenured professor of economics at a university some hundreds of miles from her. Not only that, he bragged he had been nominated for a Nobel Prize the year before. His writings were cutting edge in the fields of economics, and he had a great respect even from his peers, even though he was a young man. And maybe one day in the near future, he would actually win the Nobel Prize. And he knew, he flattered her. He knew she was tremendously intelligent. He didn't know why she had wound up being a sex worker, but she deserved a better life than that. He came from a very, very wealthy family. He had a huge trust fund of millions of dollars of his own money. He didn't have to even be a college professor if he didn't want to be, but he liked teaching and he liked economics. But he wanted her to come away, meet him, and see if she could consider becoming his mate at some point. And she said she couldn't do that. He said, do you ever take a vacation? Yeah, once in a while I take some time off. He said, let me, give me a chance. I want to take a car trip with you. I'd like to go around the United States to various beautiful places, to national parks, to beautiful beaches. I'd like to talk, stroll, have nice meals with you, explore the possibilities of your coming away from your life and coming away with me and not going on with the life you have because I have everything. I could provide you the fulfillment of any other kinds of wishes you might have. I have the economic means to do that. He said, be brave, come away with me. You're entitled to a vacation. You don't have to tell your employers where you're going. Just come. And so she did. And she had a delightful time. She had a really good time. And he said, close your apartment and come move in with me. And if it continues to be wonderful, let us get married. I'm proposing to you now, just based on the time we've had together. And she did. She moved to another state. She went to live in his college town in his beautiful mansion. He was very close to his mother, or had an even bigger and more impressive mansion. His father was dead. They had lunch frequently with mother. She passed muster. Mother found her beautiful enough and intelligent enough, even if she came from peonage and was not from one of the first 500 families in the United States. She had the raw material to make a good wife for her son, her boy prince son. And so the marriage was uh, culminated, endorsed, and she became his wife. Then she found out the main functions of her life was to be arm candy for him, to go to faculty meetings, philanthropic fundraisers, all kinds of events, public lectures he would give, and to be adorable and personable and charming to the people who he wanted her to meet, and to be a great hostess, hosting many interesting events in their home for people he thought were significant and important. And she was to be a very, very traditional wife. She was to dress in beautiful clothing and look gorgeous and uh, be an extension of whatever he wanted her to be. That was okay for a while. She enjoyed it. It felt comfortable, felt indulgent. But after a while, she said to him, I did graduate college, she said. And you know what? I'd like to go back to school. I think I'd like to go to graduate school. You can certainly afford it and you can arrange for admissions for me. I'm going to start back to school. And he said, no, I don't want you to go back to school. You're going to be busy with your classes and you're going to be busy studying and you need to do what I'm prescribing for you to do. And it began to feel controlling to her. It began to feel it had a bite in it. He started to sound angry with her. She was disappointing his script, and he started to sound like he was capable of getting very increasingly controlling. And sure enough, that's what began to unfold. They got into a downward spiral. The more he told her it was forbidden, she couldn't do it. She had to get his permission, and he wasn't giving her any permission. She started to get more and more openly rebellious and said she was going to do it. And if it wasn't okay with him, they were going to get a divorce. And at one point, it tipped over into violence between the two of them. She told him to go fuck himself. She was leaving, and he lost his temper and he started to beat her up with his fists. And he succeeded in breaking her nose and a couple ribs, punching her, and she wound up going to the emergency room, and the personnel in the emergency room wanted her to file charges against him, and she refused to do it. And the DA got involved and said that he was going to prosecute whether she would or not. And mother used her all her influence and all her money to try and get this calmed, but a divorce had to happen, so she left and she went back to the town in the Northwest where she could start her life all over again and pick up with the man who hired her, the realtor, and start back into the sex business, which she proceeded to do. At some point, another kind of wisdom began to set in. She didn't like it that she was very busy in the sex trade, but two-thirds of whatever was being charged, she had to turn over to the company that she was working for. She would put the money in the bank and then she would write them a check for services for her business. And she didn't like that. She didn't want to turn money over to them. And she decided that they would not check up on her. They were too busy with hundreds like her scattered all over the country. By that time, she had believed this must be a branch of the mafia who's running this very successful business. And they're not going to bother with her. She's a little pea in a pod, and she could start booking things separately. She would get another phone line with an unlisted number and give it only to her most favorite clients, and by word of mouth from them, the business might expand, but she was going to keep all the money for herself. And that's what she was doing. And then she started getting frightened. Oh my God, that was a mistake to do that. Maybe she should quit. Maybe she should not do this. Maybe she's going to be found out. Maybe she can't conceal. There are greater and greater panic because she was essentially a decent person. She didn't want to lie. She didn't want to break rules. She wanted to do what was expected of her. So it was very painful for her, even to be duplicitous with what she thought was the mafia. She believed she deserved all kinds of punishment in her heart of hearts, and she wound up having to flee. So I started working with her. I learned more about her youth. I learned more about her family. I think at time, so I'll spare my audience those details, even though they're quite interesting. I just wanted to say that uh, she get in panic again and call 911 herself or call the FBI and say she was being spied upon and her life was a danger. And people would take her call, listen to her kindly, and then say they'll look into it. But of course, they were just humoring her. No, I'm sure nobody was looking into anything. Whoever she was talking to on the phone say, we have another crazy person on the line. Uh, she was complaining a lot too about living with her mother. Her mother was groaning and saying it was costing her a lot of money to pay for the therapy. It was costing her a lot of money to feed her. Things were bad for her mother. Her mother's work was not going. Her mother was a real estate agent, and the market was terrible right now. She was having trouble selling any houses, so mom was worried all the time about how she was going to meet the overhead. The girl felt unwelcome and a burden to her mother. She started to say to me, "I have to work. I can't just sit at home frightened and terrible. I have to do something, generate some money again, and finally even a little apartment, and thank my mother for services and get away from her because she's just angry and irritable with me all the time." So I said, if you can not talk to coworkers or to bosses about the fears you have and about the voices you're hearing that are telling you to kill yourself and the other things you're going through, if you can just keep the secret part of your life secret, and you and I will talk about what to do with it. Maybe you could persuade somebody to hire you. You're pleasant enough in manner and in looks, and she did. She got a job selling sofas, and she began to feel somewhat better. As a matter of fact, the worst of her symptomatology, the hearing of the voices, and the feeling self-destructive started to mute when she was engaged in generating income and feeling like she was doing at least something with her talent. She enjoyed talking to the customers, and she enjoyed getting them something, a purchase that pleased them. She even said that maybe she could start dating. And I forgot how where did she find the guy? I don't think there were no phones and dating apps back then. There were dating services of some kind. I don't know if they published directories, how she found it, but she found a man to go out with, and then she got very frightened. He started talking to her on the phone. He wanted to see her in person. She got frightened about seeing him. So I said, that's okay. There are ways to do it to be safe. Go meet him at a restaurant. He's not likely to attack you or do anything harmful in a restaurant. And have a conversation with him, see if he manages to get you to feel lulled into a sense of security and safe enough that you might want to see him again, and leave before he does and go home. He won't know where you live. He has only a phone number, and the phone number is unlisted, so he can't get your address from anybody, and you'll be okay. I think you'll be reasonably safe. I can't guarantee you'll be 100% safe, but if you want your life to improve, there's some risks you have to begin taking. So she went out with him and she liked him. She liked the pleasure of his company. She agreed to have further dinners with him, always driving herself there, leaving before he did so he wouldn't see what kind of car she was driving or where she parked, and then meeting him again. The fourth visit, though, he behaved in a way that panicked her, and she decided never to see him again. What did he do? They went out to a sushi restaurant, and he had a plate of sushi, and there was one of those indoor sprinklers over the table where she was seated at to go off if there's a fire in the premises. And she had noticed it, and she had the idle thought, maybe that's a camera, or maybe that's a uh, microphone in that thing. It's really only a disguised sprinkler, and maybe she's being observed, and he's part of the plot to observe her. And then he took a sushi plate and he started to move the pieces of sushi around, idly fiddling with him while he was talking to her. And before they were eating the sushi, and she immediately knew, she absolutely knew that he was making a code. The sushi pieces were a code that were communicating something to her up to the sprinkler head. And she excused herself immediately and said she's sorry she wasn't feeling well. She had to go to the bathroom, but she'd be back. But she left by the back door and never returned. And she never returned any of his phone calls. She wouldn't, he left pleading messages with her, but she wouldn't even talk to him and she wouldn't tell him why she had disappeared. And she started to get worse after that again. She was brooding that nothing was safe. She would never have a companion. The only thing was safe was she would have to be alone for the rest of her life. And she was spiraling into despair, and a crisis came. She came for a visit, and just before she left, she made what we call a doorknob confession. She told me probably the most significant thing in her session as she was leaving. She said, I think the mafia are getting closer. She said, I'm really frightened. Again, I'm going to be killed. If somebody gets in touch with you, because I know I have some statements that you sent me lying around somewhere in my desk. If somebody calls you to let you know that I'm dead, that I've killed myself, she said, don't you believe it? I'm not going to kill myself, but somebody might murder me. And then she left with giving me this news that if I get called because she's dead, it means that somebody has killed her. And that's not what I heard at all. I heard this, that life is becoming intolerable and there's a good chance she's going to kill herself. And I left them as soon as she left. I ran after her, but I couldn't find her. And I went back in my office, left a message on her answering machine. We had answering machines then. I said it was me. And I said, I took the last thing she said very, very seriously. And I don't want her to die. I want her not to stay home tonight, but to go to a motel where nobody knows her and check in and be safe all night and be safe from herself and be safe from the mafia and come in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning and I would meet her and I would find a way to make sure that the danger she was in would go away and that it would go away permanently. I'm sorry I hadn't thought of how to heal her before this, but now I promised her at 7 o'clock in the morning, I will tell her exactly how she can be kept safe. So I went to bed that night, not knowing whether I would see her, hear from her at 7 o'clock in the morning or not. I tossed and turned. I hadn't the foggiest notion what I was going to say to her. But as I was trying to get to sleep, I remembered. I had a student about 5 years earlier, graduate student in a class I was teaching, and he was a full-blooded Navajo Indian. And he wanted to become a psychologist for some reason and went to graduate school to get a PhD in psychology. And after class was over, he came up to me and he said, I've enjoyed your class and I've enjoyed going through this program. I look forward to getting my license. And I wanted to do something to thank you. I have a present for you. And I said, oh my God, you've talked about your life some here. You live close to the line. You're a poor starving student and you're not going to make a lot of money getting the hours you need for licensure. You don't have to give me any present. He said, well, it's important to me. It's part of my tradition. I want to honor you. And this present is not going to cost me anything to give you. So will you let me give you a present? I said, yes, all right, but it's not going to cost you anything. I'll be glad to have the present. What is it? He said, I have to come to your office and be alone with you somewhere. I said, okay, come to my office. Here's the first free time. And he came to my office and he said, I have the present. I'm going to smudge you. And I said, you're going to do what? I had no idea what the fuck he was talking about. He said, here, you see this? This is a sage stick. And I saw it was a bunch of sage twigs and they had been bound up into a kind of little sage bush and tied with pretty colored threads, yarn, not threads. It was heavier. It was yarn. It was three different colors of yarn, one at the top, one in the middle, one at the bottom. And the top of this had been singed. I could see fire had been put to it. And he had a little blue candle in his hand too, and some matches. And he said, okay, I'm going to light these matches. You see, the sage could be lit on fire. I said, yeah, okay. He said, all right, I'm going to light the sage on fire. And now it's going to start smoking. And he said, the smoke is going to be in the atmosphere of your office. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to bring the smoke stick close to you and I'm going to blow gently on it. I'm going to blow smoke in your face. He said, you will be forced to inhale some of it. and you will inhale some of it and take it inside. And while you're inhaling it, I'm smudging you. I'm going to dance some dance steps, and I'm going to chant some Navajo chants that are sacred. And I'm promising you, thank you for letting me do this. You're going to live a long life, and you're going to have many accomplishments if you let me do this to you. And I said, well, I will be deeply indebted to you for the rest of my life for what you're doing today. So this may be the most precious gift I ever get. And he finished, and I thanked him, and he left. And as he left, he did his own version of doorknob confession. He said, oh, by the way, let me go back for a second. I'm putting the sage stick and the candle up here on the shelf of your office because, it's quite possible you may find the need to use this someday. And I'm leaving it here for you so you can use it when you need it. So that night in the night, thinking of seeing my client in the morning, talk about doing something I've never done before. It occurred to me that what I needed to do for her is I needed to smudge her. That was the way I was going to overcome her despair. And I was also saying to myself, you're crazy, you're insane, you're going to get in trouble with the board of psychology. Why are you doing this? You can't do things like this. Psychologists don't do that kind of nonsense. What is this? Mystical horseshit from the Navajo people? You don't believe in that. Come on. You're a secular empiricist. What are you doing? You were humoring that damn student. You're corrupt and duplicitous, and now you're going to do this crazy duplicity and pull your client into this kind of crazy madness because you're impotent and don't know what to do, and you don't tell her to go back to the neuropsychiatric institute and increase her medication or tell her she has to live with somebody. There are sensible things you can do, and you're going to do this craziness. Boy, was I chewing on myself. And then she came, and I decided I was going to honor my own inspiration. And I explained to her what I was going to do. I told her that the only thing more powerful than contemporary technology, because she was afraid the mafia was spying on her by getting into her computer, by having sophisticated listening devices, by having complicated tricks for how to spy on her, by having powerful weapons that they could kill her with. They were going to use modern technology to destroy her. I said the only thing more powerful than modern technology is ancient wisdom. And I'm going to use ancient wisdom to keep you safe. And I told her about my student, and I told her what he did to me and said to me. And I said, he said I was going to need this someday. Well, you're the someday. And now I'm going to keep you safe. And I lit the sage stick and I started blowing the smoke in her face. And I danced some dance steps as best I could. I said some fragments of Hebrew prayers that I remembered. I didn't know what the hell they meant, but I chanted them as best I could. And I said, now you're going to be safe. You're going to live a long life and you're going to have many achievements, I said to her. I said, you are safe now. You're on the other side. The mafia cannot do a fucking thing to you anymore. Oh, by the way, it also suggested it might not be the mafia. It might be her mother-in-law who hated her for making trouble for her son who was trying to destroy her, because she would probably have the wherewithal, the income to hire private detectives, even to hire a hitman. And she was a more likely candidate. Maybe we needed to spy on her mother if we were to find out what was really going on and who was persecuting her. I had another target for her to think about. So at any rate, all that slipped away. Uh, 4 months after I had that intervention with her, she stopped hearing voices nearly as much. She didn't feel as panicked about anything. The suicidal ideation began to subside. And then rescue came in another form. A former friend of hers from college days was in the last stages of multiple sclerosis and was becoming increasingly impaired and unable to care for herself. She wondered if my client would be willing, if she had nothing better going for her, to move across the country. She could live rent free on a beautiful estate in Northern Virginia, if she would be the companion and caretaker of her old friend and watch over her, and then be the executor of her estate after she finally passed. And she did agree to go and do that. And while she was there in town shopping in the grocery store one day, she met a man who found her interesting and decided he wanted to spend time with her. So she started to date him and some of the time off. And 2 years later, after her companion that she was taking care of died, she inherited a nice little stipend from the woman's estate. The man who had been courting her asked her to marry him. She married him and moved into his place. He had a wonderful ancient farmhouse on a big piece of land, and he had a sharecropper who was doing the main farming, but he liked raising his own fruits and vegetables on part of the land. He was the town's handyman. He was very good with tools, and while he had a degree in political science and was a very intelligent person. He liked working with tools in his hands. And between his inheritance he had and his working as a handyman, he made a reasonable living and loved fixing broken things. And she loved farming too. And she loved helping him and she loved him. And the rest of her healing took place. It's now 15 years later. She keeps in touch with me. There are no signs of any psychotic process whatsoever. She has a very contented life, a better life than most Americans I know. She's living in a beautiful place. She lives a life of great simplicity, raising strawberry, raising flowers, raising corn, keeping her husband's tools in order, booking visits with him with people who need his services, making love to him, listening to wonderful old movies. She likes watching old movies with him on television. She has an admirable life of great simplicity. She's not in the consumerist culture at all. She doesn't care about pyramiding net worth, getting fancier and fancier houses. They drive old cars. He has an old classic truck that he keeps running, and they have an old car, an old convertible that she's fond of driving. And they live lives of quiet, wonderful, decent simplicity. And she has many friends in the town too. She probably knows how to live better than I do. So that's the end of that story. It's an example of daring to trust my intuition and to do something that nobody ever taught me to do. I didn't believe in it at all. I was scared doing it, but I did it anyhow. And I'll have a lot more to say about this topic next time, but I will stop now. Whoops. Okay, you guys can unmute yourself.
I have a question for you, Arthur.
All right.
The bat mitzvah that you provided for her.
Yes.
Um, uh, that maybe she never had, came from your intuition. Is that not right? And
Well, that's the label I'm giving to it, but I don't believe it's intuition. Intuition is like some mystical process.
well,
So,
but in so many, what inspired you to provide that intervention that you did, which conceivably was, successful for her?
yes. What
Is there-
inspired me?
yes.
A variety of things.
Desperation.
Yeah, that's one of them. I was desperate. Uh, the second one is what Kaiser talked about. I don't like knowing that there's a proportion of clients that I'm going to fail with. I thought I was going to fail hugely. I would fail with her actually being dead. That would be a terrible failure. And I wanted, I knew that the ordinary things that are done for people like her don't do much. They're not very successful. We're not very good. Nobody is very good with dealing with people like her. They usually wind up in chronically miserable lives for the rest of their lives. So I thought, if I'm to try something so I don't fail, it better not be more of the same. More of the same leads nowhere. And so I have to come up with something that's not been tried before, or at least I haven't tried before. And that memory came to me as I was falling asleep, the memory of having been smudged. That was a novel experience I had had. And for a moment, I felt I was in the presence of some strange power. And there's a superstitious part of all of us. Maybe actually I was hearing something that was real and important. I had that experience while I was listening to my students smudging me. And I thought, at least I can pass this on to her.
Mhm.
So is that intuition? I don't know. It's a kind of resonance. The client is talking, the client is having an impact on us. And while the client is having an impact on us, we're having memories, we're having conversations with ourselves. Well, I'll put out the array of things we're going through while we're listening. But somehow, out of that concatenation of being attuned in the back and forth with the client and what our own internal processes are coming, thoughts about what we might do to proceed are occurring to us. And I think most of us are trained, throw away all the thoughts that are not the things we've been taught to do. Don't pay attention to those. Those are crazy thoughts. Those are dangerous thoughts. Those are bad thoughts. But I don't think there are any thoughts that are bad thoughts. There is no such
Mhm.
thing as a bad thought.
Mhm. Mhm.
And some of that array of what we might be thinking about could indeed turn out to be useful if we would try using it.
Hey,
Do you
Arthur. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I was just going to ask Arthur what the CPT code for smudging is.
do you fully believe that your intervention or interventions stopped her paranoia?
No, I think it stopped her. It reduced her panic, and it allowed her to continue to try to listen to our back and forth and try on the trail that she had started on, but then had eliminated again. She was had started working and had started the prospect of finding some good human companionship for herself. I believe those things were necessary to get her out of her craziness, and I wanted her to be productive and to have human nourishment. I wanted to keep supporting those things. And I thought her distress was being reduced enough so we could proceed with that undertaking some more. That's what she needed, and that's what the work was that we had to undertake. And then, wonder of wonders, again, fate showed up in ways I hadn't planned. She had this offer from somebody who once was a very good friend of hers who was in trouble. So that was really good for her. She felt like she was out of herself and she was of use to another human being. And they had, in quiet time together, they had a very nice friendship flow going on between the two of them. So it
Mhm.
was healing for her as well as caretaking for the woman. And she allowed herself then to proceed further down the trail. She got somebody she allowed to become really significant with her. And she got married and she took up a life with him. She had a life partner now, and she found activities that nourished her soul. And she healed herself. We can't heal anybody. They have to engage in the right kinds of interactions with the world and get the nourishments they need. All we can do is encourage them and make suggestions about what might be helpful for them to invest themselves in.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I think in a simple way, you just met her where she was. She was facing
Yes,
this very, yeah, facing a very almost ephemeral, non-defined threat. And so you met her with an intervention that was on the same footing in a way, that was
yes.
more universal and less conscribed and less trying to talk her out of what everybody else would have tried to talk her out of, really.
Yeah, you got to stop thinking those crazy thoughts.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You think you could do the intervention again?
Yeah, I could.
I keep one of those around after hearing Arthur's story a while back.
You want to show it to the camera so it
Yeah,
gets
I was going
recorded?
to. Uh, Here you go.
Yeah, that's what they look like. Oh, you
You
only
can
have a single color thread.
Yeah, it's only got one color, but I've used it a lot
Yeah.
of times.
Oh,
Sometimes
yeah.
sometimes after relatives visit. Scott visits my office. I have to wave it around a little, whatever it is. I think also in tune with that idea of intuition. I think a lot of times we're trained almost to be playing poker with our clients. We'll have that poker face and
Oh, yes.
we'll hide in a way what we are. And I don't do that. You can tell I
Thank
let
you.
things bubble out all the time and I crack jokes, or sometimes I'm making some weird face and I don't even know it. And my clients will ask me what it is. And if I can at all do it, I try to just let out in that moment what's going on in my mind as a reaction to what's going on with them. And it's usually works quite well.
Yeah, there is a book in our profession. I forgot who the author is. It's called "The Therapist is the Therapy,"
Yeah.
and we're taught to withhold ourselves as much as possible from the interaction with our clients.
I find the most dramatic and important intervention is the words that I'm speaking to myself.
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
And in some ways then I share that with the client,
Yes.
and usually it's tremendously helpful. In some ways it's just something that is moved in me to provide for the client.
They're feeling powerfully at that moment. You're caring about them and you're being in some kind of meaningful partnership with them.
Mhm.
And those are really the most powerful levers we have. All right, before we go, I now remembered I left out what for me was a very touching detail of what I did with her that day. As she was leaving, I saw on my bookshelf in another place a little gift another client had given me. There was a tiny miniature Kachina doll. It was a souvenir from a visit to the Navajo reservation. And it had nothing to do with my student, but it was there on my shelf too. So I gave it to her, much as I would to a small child who needs a transitional object when they're going off to nursery school. They need a blankie or they need a stuffed animal to clutch onto. This was going to be my transitional object for her. So I told her when she went that I had done a ceremony with the Kachina doll a long time ago, waiting to give it to somebody. The Kachina doll was going to be her guardian and her the one who would make sure that the spell that had happened on her that day was kept holy and safe. All she had to do was put it on her desk where she worked, and nobody could bug her apartment anymore. Nobody could spy on her anymore. The Kachina doll had the power to block it. And I just heard from her last week. She was in touch with me again. It was an outcry of appreciation for how I had saved her life. And she reminded me she still has the Kachina doll on her desk in her home. And she would not go and to move into any premises anywhere without taking the Kachina doll with her to keep her safe. What is this? This is what happens at what the dramatists talk about. I think in psychotherapy, often we're all engaged collectively in the willing suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
We, we believe, so therefore it happens, even though there's no basis for the belief at all. Mm. All right. On that note, I think I will stop and I'll come back and talk more about my style in the current day.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Bye.
we'll see you.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye now.